In the aftermath of the brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk, we are seeing a massive, aggressive, highly organized cancel culture operation, the likes of which we have never seen before, coming from MAGA, attempting to cancel or get fired people who not only ghoulishly celebrate Charlie Kirk's murder, but who even criticize him in the aftermath of that murder. And it's so bad and so excessive that a conservative writer went on Fox News to sound the alarm and caution people to stop. Check it out.
So now there are some major corporations shutting down negative public comments on Charlie Kirk and taking disciplinary action against employees who post them. Want to bring in Kennedy and Noah Rothman on this. Hello to both of you. Not small companies either. On screen, here we go. Microsoft, Delta Airlines, Office Depot, NASDAQ, Carolina Panthers, MSNBC. Noah, to you, this was not wasting time.
Not wasting time at all. Some of this is unobjectionable, essentially political hygiene. Unless you think that morals clauses in contracts, for example, are somehow ignoble, there's nothing untoward about a company that doesn't want an employee engaging in behaviors that reflect poorly on it. So I'm of two minds on this. Certainly there should not be any federal officer, state or local, anybody who takes an oath to the Constitution encouraging this sort of thing. The impropriety there should be obvious. However, and while I do think it's necessary to impose this sort of circumspection on people who indulge in their worst instincts on the internet, we should be careful about rationalizing behaviors that we wouldn't want to see in our opponents. It's a very deeply human thing to want to mete out a level of pain commensurate with what we're experiencing. That doesn't necessarily make it noble or just. We should be circumspect about the kind of behaviors that we are policing, seeking to police, or at least asking responsible parties in society, cultural and corporate, to police for us. It's a fine line.
Yeah, I get Microsoft.
So he's sounding the alarm. He's saying, number one, the government better have nothing to do with this because that would be the worst kind of cancel culture. That would be government censorship. So the Trump administration needs to not be involved in this at all. And he says regarding the civilian attempt, he's like, we need to be careful because this sure sounds like the sort of thing that we as conservatives used to complain about, and we're also setting a precedent that can be used against us. So he's citing very practical concerns as well. Now, before we dive into this, I also want to remind people, because we did a couple of videos about this, that sitting members of Congress are also ramping up the aggression. Nancy Mace, Derek Van Orden, we talked about Derek Van Orden yesterday, holding their own districts hostage and elements of their own district hostage to punish one person who said something either ghoulish but permissible under the First Amendment of the Constitution about Charlie Kirk, or something that's not even ghoulish. They just criticized him after his death, and that is still something that they don't like. They're demanding firings. Otherwise, they're going to, demand that there be some sort of funding cut or funding freeze from the federal government to their entire district. So collective punishment of their own people, not even like other districts or liberal districts or whatever, their own people. That would be bad enough. This is even worse in many respects. So this is being reported on by CNN and other places. People are getting fired for allegedly celebrating Charlie Kirk's murder. It looks like a coordinated effort. Dozens of social media posts and messages about the murder of Charlie Kirk, including some that celebrated his death, are being spotlighted by conservative activists, Republican elected officials. So again, consider what the conservative in that clip just talked about. You're having government officials get involved in this as well. And a doxing website is part of an online campaign to punish the posters behind the messages. Prominent far-right influencer Laura Loomer, a U.S. senator, and a site called Expose Charlie's Murderers have all drawn attention to people who have posted messages about Kirk's Wednesday assassination. The campaigns show how social media posts or personal messages, even by accounts with few followers or from people who are not public figures, could easily be surfaced and publicized, and people's personal information can be spread across the internet at a time when doxing is easier than ever. The Charlie's Murderer site, whose domain was registered anonymously and which says it's not a doxing site, claims it has, quote, received nearly 30,000 submissions, according to a message on the site's front page on midday Saturday. So this is about 2 days old. Currently, there are a few dozen submissions published on the site. Quote, this website will soon be converted into a searchable database of all 30,000 submissions, filterable by general location and job industry. This is a permanent and continuously updating archive of radical activists calling for violence. Most people whose messages have been posted on the site do not seem to refer to themselves as activists, nor did it seem that they were calling for violence, or at least many of them. It says, Administrators for the site did not respond to a request for comment. The site also opened an X account on Friday. And again, remember the name, Expose Charlie's Murders, charliesmurders.com. Remember that. Loomer posted on X on Wednesday, hours after the fatal shooting, that, quote, "I will be spending my night making everyone I find online who celebrates his death famous. So prepare to have your whole future professional aspirations ruined if you are sick enough to celebrate his death." CNN was unable to reach Loomer for comment. On X, one account has begun running a trophy case, a, quote, mega thread of all the people Twitter gets fired, updated as live as news comes in, with dozens of entries of people it claims have lost their jobs. And after MSNBC fired senior political analyst Matthew Dowd after he said Kirk's rhetoric might have contributed to his shooting, Donald Trump himself weighed in. Quote, "They fired this guy," Dowd from MSNBC, who's a terrible guy, terrible human being, but they fired him. "I hear they're firing other people," Trump said on Fox News on Sunday morning. On his Substack after the firing, Dowd said the right-wing media mob attacked him on several platforms. CNN has reached out to Dowd for comment. Some of the people whose posts have been highlighted say they're now receiving a barrage of harassment and are worried about becoming the victims of violence. For example, Canadian independent journalist Rachel Gilmore posted that she is, quote, terrified about retaliation from Kirk's, quote, far-right fans after the shooting. That post is the first listed on the anonymous website, including a part where Gilmore said she hoped Kirk survived. So again, I want to be clear. She said she hopes Kirk survived, and she's on this website. She said in a video online that she did not celebrate Kirk's death and that she hoped he survives in another post. She also said she received a tsunami of threats and called the last 48 hours of her life a, quote, living hell. Rebecca Jones, a former Florida coronavirus data scientist who in 2022 claimed the state of Florida pressured her to manipulate pandemic data, said she contacted the police twice about death threats and about the, quote, hit list, her name for the anonymous website. Jones's claims about Florida's pandemic data were found to be unsubstantiated, according to a state inspector general report, a finding she disagrees with. Jones posted about Kirk on Wednesday, writing, quote, "Save your sympathies for the innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire of MAGA's violent political messaging machine." The website republished that post along with other pieces of Jones' personal information, thus potentially doxing. Quote, "It's absolutely fair to call it a coordinated harassment campaign," said Laura Edelson, assistant professor at Northeastern University and director of the Cybersecurity for Democracy project. Quote, "That's exactly, absolutely why it exists, to coordinate and target the harassment towards selected individuals." So who's getting fired? Some Republican elected officials are also publicizing people who posted about Kirk's murder, including some public sector employees, like teachers. Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee said a Middle Tennessee State University employee should be removed after writing they had, quote, "zero sympathy for Kirk's death." The university confirmed to CNN in a statement that the employee was fired, quote, "effective immediately." Quote, "No university employee who celebrates the assassination of Charlie Kirk should be trusted to shape the minds of the next generation in the classroom. The firing of this MTSU employee was the right decision, and it sends a clear message that this kind of reprehensible behavior must not be tolerated," Blackburn said in a statement to CNN. Republican Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina also encouraged the firing of a new public school teacher, whom the school district later confirmed to local news was no longer employed with the district. And private companies such as Freddy's Frozen Custard and Steak Burgers and the Carolina Panthers have also let employees go for their social media posts about Kirk. And if I'm not mistaken, the Panthers, that is the North Carolina Panthers, that's a football team here in Charlotte, okay? So DC Comics canceled the just-released Red Hood comic book series after its author, Gretchen Felker Martin, made comments about Kirk's death on social media. In since-deleted posts captured in screen grabs by other social media users, Felker Martin allegedly wrote on social media after news of Kirk's death, quote, "Hope the bullet's okay." It's pretty ghoulish. But again, like, constitutionally protected. We'll get to that. Quote, "At DC Comics, we place the highest value on our creators and community and affirm the right to peaceful individual expression of personal viewpoints. Posts or public comments can be viewed as promoting hostility or violence are inconsistent with DC's standard of conduct." The company, which like CNN is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, said in a statement, CNN has reached out to representatives for Felker Martin for comment. In most places, private companies can fire employees for any reason, at-will employment, and that includes crass social media posts, said Jeffrey Hirsch, a professor at labor and employment law at the University of North Carolina. It's a little trickier for public sector employees, but their firings are also justified if the speech is, quote, "so egregious it disrupts operations." In a 1987 case, the Supreme Court decided it was constitutionally protected speech and not grounds for firing for a government employee to tell her coworkers that she was sorry a would-be assassin failed to kill President Reagan. Jesus. And it's extra sensitive for teachers, Hirsch said, since they work with young people, especially if the posts are applauding political violence. Quote, the reality of the situation is, if they're getting flooded, or even if it's from one political wing with complaints, it's likely to push an employer to fire somebody, he said. A range of posts. In other cases, some social media users highlighted Kirk's pro-Second Amendment stance, including past news reports that he said some gun deaths were, quote, unfortunately worth to keep it, the Second Amendment. The highlighted social media entries span a range of responses to Kirk's shooting. One post, for example, simply noted the world continued on. The website says its explicit aim is to get the people at Spotlights fired. It was registered through a privacy service with an address in Iceland. And the site's name already implies that people whose information it shares are responsible for Kirk's murder, paving the way for harassment, Hank Tarrin, CEO at open source threat intelligence platform Open Measures, told CNN. The website also echoes back to the Kirk-founded conservative Turning Point's Professor Watchlist, whose purpose was to unmask what it called radical professors, but often led to harassment and violent threats towards people named on that list. Altogether, quote, it could be reasonable to conclude that there's some intent to incite harassment, Tarrin said. High political tensions across the country are ramping up people's emotional responses, said Edelson, the Northeastern professor, and it, quote, creates a need to do something. The blanket blame on the, quote, left in some cases extends the blame past the shooter into an amorphous enemy. Whitney Phillips, assistant professor of information politics and ethics at the University of Oregon, told CNN. Quote, attempts to call out people designated as being celebratory of Kirk's death or merely critical of Kirk's life work to give shape and weight to the enemy, Phillips said. That feeds into, quote, a false culture war framing. As a result, she said, disconnected groups can be perceived as, quote, a downright spiritual enemy of conservatives and, by extension, America itself. And so there are other reports on this, more local. People are getting fired for allegedly celebrating Charlie Kirk's murder. It looks like a coordinated attack. Far-right groups dox online critics after Charlie Kirk's death. And again, this is from Al Jazeera. At least 15 people have been fired or suspended from their jobs after discussing the killing online, according to a Reuters tally on Saturday, based on interviews, public statements, and local press reports. New York Times reporting on this too. The right-wing activists urge followers to expose those celebrating Kirk killing. The widespread and fast-moving campaign has already resulted in lost jobs, suspensions, and internal investigations, heightening tensions online between supporters and detractors of Charlie Kirk. Unheard, let's see this. Unheard, which I believe, I think Emily Jashinsky from Breaking Points is affiliated with that. Unheard, Charlie Kirk death supercharges right-wing cancel culture. Perhaps it should have been expected. Following the fatal shooting of Charlie Kirk last week, portions of the American right have embarked on a campaign of revenge. And then it goes on to the Matthew Dowd. Now, several days later, dozens of people across America have been fired, suspended, or put under investigation for expressing schadenfreude over Kirk's death. These include school teachers, academics, video game developers, and firemen. There's now a database going around called Expose Charlie's Murderers, which documents the social media posts as well as the names, addresses, and employment details of thousands of people deemed to have celebrated Kirk's death and supported political violence. After his death, Comedy Central pulled an episode of South Park last month that poked fun of Kirk as a right-wing debate bro. Some MAGA supporters have blamed the animated show for contributing to the shooting, yet Kirk himself said he found the episode, quote, awesome and hilarious. He saw the satirical depiction as proof that conservative ideas he was spreading on college campuses had penetrated popular culture, and it looks like the rest of the article is paywalled. If you look at Charlie's murderers on Twitter, you're going to see all sorts of things. Nathan J. Robinson of Current Affairs magazine, Current Affairs, who, by the way, I disagree with a lot, says, notably, many of the entries on the Charlie Kirk's murderers database are people saying things like, quote, I don't think he should have been shot, but he wasn't a good person, and we should give equal attention to other victims. For this, they try to get you fired. If you look at cancel culture, a lot of references, a lot of people calling out the hypocrisy of the right about this. If you look at Kirk database, they have apparently changed their name. Charlie's murderers have changed the names from Expose Charlie's Murderers to the Charlie Kirk Data Foundation. So, yeah, I don't know why they did that, other than perhaps they thought that they were opening themselves up to legal exposure. But folks, this is like aggressive. You look at this on social media, it's insane. It's insane in terms of the scale. It's like very aggressive, hitting the ground running, organized in a really central way. And there seems to be an acknowledgement by many of them of the hypocrisy. They're pissed off and they don't care, or they believe that this was done to them and they're just, doing tit for tat. I just want to say a couple of things. Obviously, if you work for an employer, you're generally speaking probably a private employer. Again, as the article notes, you're an at-will employee, which means you can be fired for pretty much anything. And unless it is explicitly constitutionally protected. So an employer couldn't fire you, at least explicitly, because you're black or a woman, right? Because those are, I think, gender and certainly race are protected classes, right? They can't like fire you for openly misogynistic purposes. But basically, they can just say, you know what, you're fired, and not give you a reason, or you're fired, because I just woke up angry. If you're an at-will employee, you are exposed to this. And to be clear, words have social consequences. It's just true. We've seen this, with the left exposing and Democrats exposing at times, terrible things said by Republicans. And it's absolutely true, period, that when you say something that's inappropriate, there's a chance that your employer can succumb to a pressure campaign and fire you. But the thing about this is there is an organization and scale and aggression for this operation that I've never seen before. And it is worth noting the hypocrisy, because for years we were told, cancel culture, you shouldn't be canceled for mean tweets, and, you should be able to speak your mind, First Amendment, you shouldn't be canceled or doxed or suffer any sort of consequences because words aren't violence. And now you have this. And again, I want to be clear. It's not just targeting the people it professes to target. It's not just targeting people who even celebrated Kirk's assassination. It's targeting people who just are critical of him after his death. And again, I want to be clear. I condemned the violence against Charlie Kirk, and I maintain that position. I don't think he should have been killed. I think he had every right to express himself freely and openly under the cloak of First Amendment protections. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Charlie Kirk is a good guy or was a good guy or that I liked his politics. I don't think he was a moderate. I don't think he was a good guy. I don't think he had good politics. And that's not, there's just, I don't see what's necessarily controversial about that. I understand why Kirk fans might disagree with that. But imagine how Republicans would have reacted in the aftermath of the Paul Pelosi attack or the Melissa Hortman Minnesota Democratic attacks, or the shootings back in 2022 in New Mexico that were conducted by a Trump supporter against Democrats, or January 6th, or whatever act of right-wing violence you care to think of. Imagine if there was an aggressive push by not just liberals and progressives on social media, but also sitting members of Congress and governors and people in power, the Biden administration, to basically gather up and circulate the words and personal information of private citizens who just so happen to be conservative, who said inappropriate things or ghoulish things about those acts of political violence, who weren't appropriately mournful, who criticized the victims of those violence or the parties that they belong to. Imagine how these right-wingers would have responded. They would have been understandably upset. And instead, what we're seeing is that, as I've said before, cancel culture and the instinct to punish people for the things that they say, which are taboo, that's just part of human nature. That has existed ever since there have been three people in existence, right? And one of them disagreed with the other two, and they disagreed with such sufficiency that the other two tried to accrue a social or reputational consequence on the third. Certainly social media has exacerbated those instincts, but that's something that knows neither the right or the left. The right and the left are, of course, guilty of ostracizing and trying to extract social and reputational and indeed even professional consequences for the things that you say. But this sort of operation is stunning. And again, the fact that they were pitching it as these are Charlie's murderers, when in fact there's only one murderer that we're aware of, Tyler Robinson, the man who fired the shot into Charlie Kirk. It's not good, folks. It's not good. And it is setting a dangerous precedent. And I go all the way back to what that conservative journalist, Noah Rothman, said on Fox News. The federal government should have absolutely nothing to do with this. And the people in the civilian United States who are doing this should be very careful, because they are going after people that are well outside the purview that they claim to have. And it's bad enough that they're going after them, I would argue, but they have every right to do it, I suppose. But they're inculcating harassment against people who didn't say anything ghoulish, who just don't have this cultish devotion to Charlie Kirk. And again, they're setting a dangerous precedent that could be used against them the next time liberals, progressives, and Democrats are in power. It's not good, folks. It's not good at all. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.